Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. Between now and August 10th, if you use this promo code, you will automatically be entered into a drawing where 4 winners will each win one of the Commander 2018 pre-constructed decks. See the description below for more details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 2 of our 4-part look at the Commander 2018 decks. Today's focus deck is Nature's Vengeance. So like the previous video, we're going to look at every card. This is a full visual deck list spoiler for you, but I'm going to review especially the new cards. We're going to talk about those at length, and then the reprints we'll go through a little bit quicker. At the end of the video, I'll give you my final thoughts on the entire deck. Quickly before we get started, just a reminder, you heard it at the beginning of the video, we're still running the promotion with Flipside Gaming, so check out the description below to find out how you might be able to win one of these Commander 2018 decks. You're also going to find our Patreon page down there, as well as some product links for Amazon. These are all ways to help support the channel, but whether you look at those or not, it's all good. Your viewership is enough for me. Thank you for being here. Alright, let's get started with a look at the 3 foil cards that you're going to find in this product, and these are all options to be your commander. Now, this is an interesting deck. You're going to see as we go through it, and of course I'll give more detailed thoughts at the end of the video. It's supposed to be a Jund Land Matters deck, but I do feel like this deck is pulling itself in a lot of different directions. We'll talk about that as we go through. Okay, here's the featured commander. Of course, the featured ones are Planeswalkers this year. This is Lord Windgrace. Now, if you are trying to populate your graveyard, or perhaps draw some extra cards, or do some things that are relevant to lands, this is a good choice. Comes in with 5 loyalty. I do like that a lot for 5 mana. This has a +2, which is always nice. Discard a card, then draw a card. If it's a land card, discard it this way. You get to draw an additional card. So it's populating your graveyard with lands, which could matter, which we'll see in a few moments. That's kind of nice. And some card draws, never a bad thing. -3, return up to 2 target land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. You're going to find that there's a lot of ways to not only just populate your graveyard randomly, but also to throw lands in your graveyard, and there are reasons to juggle lands. We got some retrace cards and things of that nature in here, so that is very relevant. The -11 is good, but it doesn't feel epic for 11 loyalty. If an opponent has a forest, well, it's that much better, and of course destroying 6 non-land permanents is very relevant. The creation of tokens as a defensive mechanism is definitely something this deck's trying to do too. I told you it's going in a lot of directions. So we'll explore that as we see more of the cards. Overall, I do think this is a fine choice if you decide to make this your commander out of the box. Gyrus, Waker of Corpses. Now this one mixes things up a little bit. This kind of moves away from the land theme and goes more into the Graveyard Matters theme. And I'm talking really light reanimation in this particular deck out of the box, as well as some ways to populate your graveyard. And if you're populating your graveyard with enough creatures, well, this becomes a lot more relevant. It's actually not a bad card. Again, I like the fact that it has that X in the casting cost. And keep in mind, if you do make this your commander tax will go into the equation when it comes to the +1/+1 counters that will land on this thing. So that's kind of cool. It's a sizable creature. Wish it had trample or something like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't on its own. But this ability is at least interesting, at least for a portion of what this deck's trying to do. Thantis the War Weaver. We finally got a legendary creature spider. It's not bad. I'm going to be honest with you. I was hoping for something that maybe could spawn more spiders or something like that, but this is not a bad card. It costs 6 for 5/5 vigilance and reach. It's very defensive, and you're going to see why in a moment. All creatures attack each combat of Fable. Now that includes this, which does put it in jeopardy to some degree, but it will be mitigated at least a little bit by the fact that this has vigilance and reach, which is nice, so it's still defensive no matter what. And when you attack with it, by the time it actually comes back around to you, everyone else will be forced to attack with their creatures. So you only have to consider what people played, or maybe for some reason couldn't attack previously, or other vigilance creatures, things of that nature. So hopefully you'll have a line of attack with this that won't get it killed. Not always, but most of the time I think you will. Aside from that, whenever creatures attack you or a planeswalker you control, this thing gets bigger. So that is a way to make people maybe think twice about attacking you. And that's yet another theme that you're going to find in this particular deck. There's cards that create chaos, that try to encourage your opponents to attack each other and not necessarily you. This is the commander that plays most into that part of the deck. Okay, let's move on to some of the new creatures that are published here for the first time. We're going to begin with Blood Tracker. This is a fine card. I like this just because even though it has fragile stats coming out as a 4-drop 2/2, it does have flying. It's also a Vampire Wizard. I think I would like this card actually better in a Vampire deck than anywhere, but it's here. And I do enjoy the ability. I mean, paying 2 life, and that's where I say a vampire deck might be a little better for this card because you'll have lifelink and ways to gain life, I'm sure. So it kind of mitigates that a little bit. You don't see a whole lot of that in this particular deck. So you're spending life, but you do have some expendable life, typically in Commander, and you can do it on the fly, which is pretty good. So this is another card that's going to maybe deter attackers a little bit. Also, if you want to get more aggressive with it, it could sometimes put across some decent damage. The +1/+1 comes in the form of counters. It's not until end of turn, so these are permanent increases. That's kind of nice. And when it leaves the battlefield, you will get to draw some cards, hopefully. So that's actually pretty sweet, too. I do like the fact that the card is worded when this leaves the battlefield, so it does open it up for some manipulation. And it almost guarantees if something happens to this card, you will get the trigger. Decent 4-drop for sure, but again, it feels maybe a tad out of place in this deck. Here's another card that feels a little out of place to me. It's Loyal Subordinate. Zombies, I could see this in a zombie tribal deck where you're being super aggressive, trying to beat down. This is playing a weird game where behind the scenes it's making each opponent lose 3 life if your commander's in play. Now, blanket effects like this in Commander can sometimes get a target on you, so you do have to make sure you have a lot of defense. And again, this deck, at least some of the cards in this deck, are dabbling in that concept of trying to defend you as well. Almost like light pillow fort mechanics that appear sometimes on these cards. So this is one of those cards that would actually be able to do damage while you're kind of hiding behind your defenses. The only problem is, like I've stated, this deck is going in so many directions that I don't feel like that's going to necessarily be a good strategy because it might be too watered down, at least out of the box. Emissary of Grudges. Here's another card that's trying to keep people off your back. It's a good creature, 6/5 flying haste for 6. I actually like that a lot. That ability is what's kind of interesting though, because you choose a opponent, but it's a secret. So everyone's going to think twice maybe before targeting you or your things with their spells or abilities, because if they are the chosen person, it could backfire on them. So I do kind of like that. I think it's very cerebral. I think this is fantastic design, and I feel like this could be really good in a deck that's a little more all in on this type of strategy. Loyal Apprentice. We saw this card in the artifact deck that we reviewed a couple days ago. I feel like it makes more sense there because the Thopters are going to be more meaningful. In this deck, however, the Thopters, I think, are just meant to be blockers to try to buy you time when you're getting everybody all riled up and attacking and all that. So it kind of makes sense why it's here, but again, I don't feel like this strategy feels complete as we go through the deck. Nesting Dragon. Okay, finally a landfall card. This is actually an awesome card in this deck because not only does it care about lands with the landfall ability, but it creates dragon eggs when you play lands. Those dragon eggs are a good component to the try to keep people off your back strategy as well. So here's a nice crossover card that works into both those strategies. Secondly, there's tons of ways to cheat extra lands in play. You're going to see that as we go through, but there's not enough payoffs in my opinion. This is one really good one though. And also think of it this way. If you can work a sack outlet into this deck, maybe it makes the dragon eggs even that much better. Again, another card that I am very excited about and I think has an awesome design element to it. Crash of Rhino Beetles. This is a fine card. Actually, I think this is a great green commander card. This could be a staple in a lot of beatdown decks just because, you know what, the land thing, 10 or more lands. Yeah, sure, I have ways to power out lands in this deck and maybe get to that faster. However, it's commander. I'm going to have 10 or more lands at some point, and a 15/15 trample creature sure isn't bad. So again, another really strong new card here. Loyal Guardian. Now, this is a fantastic card. Imagine this in an Atraxa deck or any Go Wide deck, Selesnya token, something like that. It's good here too, but it could be better in some other builds. Now, if this is in play with your commander on the battlefield, all your creatures get a +1/+1 counter. That's fantastic. One of the few cards that actually rewards you for some of the token mechanics that you'll find in the deck. So yeah, this is another really solid new card that they designed for this product. Turn Timber Sower. Okay, we're getting more involved in lands again. Now, this time around, you're kind of juggling lands. Whenever one or more land cards are put into the graveyard from anywhere, so that's kind of nice. It could be from your hand, or if you get milled or whatever, you're going to get a green plant token. And yes, Adventure of Zendikar is in this particular product. We'll see it in a few moments when we get to reprints. So this card does work well with that. And also you have the ability for a green, sacrifice 3 creatures, and then return target land card from your graveyard to your hand. So it does let you take anything that maybe you threw in there to retrace or what have you, get it back, and then use it for a landfall mechanic. I like the ability to juggle. This is a good card that might be able to open some strategies for you. Whiptongue Hydra. This is a decent card in Commander because there's usually flyers around. If there's not, it's not going to feel real good. But when there are, you're going to be like super happy to play this card. Keep in mind, though, that this does hit your flyers too. Again, doesn't necessarily feel like it plays into this deck strategy all that much, but it's a solid card. Xantcha, Sleeper Agent. Okay, maybe one of my favorite cards in the deck, much less that came out with this whole product, honestly. This card's super sweet. First off, it's kind of a take on the old Sleeper Agent card. I do like that. Secondly, there's a lot happening here for just 3 mana. It's a 5/5. You play it, and you give it to one of your opponents. Now, what's cool is, she's got to attack every turn, but she can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. So you're kind of encouraging action, but not action towards you, hopefully towards other people. Then that last ability, anybody can activate it. Pay 3, the person that controls this loses 2 life, and the person that paid it gets to draw a card. That's kind of awesome, right? So I imagine you put this out like on turn 3, turn 4, somebody gets it. Now they have to attack with it. They have to decide who they're attacking. They make that decision eventually, attack somebody. That person says, hey, wait a minute now. I'm just going to go ahead and pay 3, draw a card. You can take 2 then. And all of a sudden the fireworks start and you're just sitting on the sidelines watching it all happen. Awesome design. It really feels like a sleeper agent kind of causing chaos. This is fantastic. And again, it does play into what this deck's trying to do with this whole chaos, get everybody to attack each other sort of sub-theme that's going on. And remember, this deck is trying to ensure that you have a lot of land available, making that triggered ability maybe a little bit better for you than others. This is one of the more expensive cards right now in the secondary market, going for around $9, although that will go down when the product's released. All right, we have one new sorcery to look at, and it is Reality Scramble. Love that art, first off. I have to point that out. But this is a retrace card. It is a little high variance. I mean, put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library, then you get to reveal cards from the top until you reveal a card of the same card type, and then put it right into play. So it's one of those random red cards that sometimes will work out, sometimes won't. But what I like about this particular deck is there's a lot of token creation. There's also the retrace element, so you can use the extra lands that you get in your hand maybe to actually activate this multiple times. Eventually, you got to hit something good, right? Or you could reconstruct your deck a little bit and maybe try to make this card a little more unfair. For example, if I only had 2 enchantments in my deck, when I pull one, I know that I'm going to get the other one if I use this ability, right? So sometimes you could kind of sculpt your deck to make this a little bit better and a little more consistent. Other things you could do just out of the box, Lord Windgrace is your only planeswalker. So if you wanted to reset the loyalty on Lord Windgrace, you could actually use this to do it. You'd have to show everyone your whole deck, but if you're playing the deck out of the box, they probably know what's in it anyway, so who cares, right? So yeah, if you think out of the box, there's some interesting things you can do with this card. Ultimately, the retrace is what pushes it enough to make me say, yeah, even if I don't have some tricks set up, this is still okay. New instance. Okay, a few new instances to look at. The first one is part of that storm cycle. It's Fury Storm. Now, this one's maybe a little more conditional than many of the others, but I think it's still really, really good in a game of Commander. It feels, again, a little strange in this deck because this is a Land Matters deck. And yes, you are running instants and sorceries, of course, but not many like really, really big ones where I would say, yes, I want Fury Storm to follow it up. The good news is you don't have to use this on your own stuff, though. And if you're sitting down to a big Commander game, you know there's going to be some big instants and sorceries flying around, so being able to fork them will always be good. If you play this for 4 before you play your Commander, it's going to be overcosted, but sometimes necessary. However, later in the game, this gets better and better and better, and under the right circumstances could even take opponents out or close out games. I love this cycle. I've been gushing over it all week. Maybe not as exciting as some of the others in the cycle, but still really good. Windgrace's Judgment. I like this a lot because it does still let you play the political game. It says for any number of opponents, destroy target non-land permanent. So you could say, I'm not going to destroy anything that belongs to you. Maybe we can form an alliance. So I do like that they left that open. Aside from that, it can also deal with a lot of problems that maybe you don't have other answers to because this is target non-land permanent. Excellent card. All right, one new land to look at, and this is actually in all 4 decks, so we talked about it at length in the last video, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But again, I will mention that I like that they left it open-ended. I don't have to just use this on my stuff. I could use this on someone else's stuff if I want to build an alliance. All right, we're going to go a little faster now through the reprints, and so you're going to see once we start getting through the bulk of the deck and we start moving faster what I mean by, I feel like the deck's just pulling itself into too many directions, maybe, at least out of the box. Again, upgrades could really do some wonders for this deck, though. Soul of Innistrad. Okay, so there's a sub, or maybe some would call a sub-sub theme of populating your graveyard in this particular deck. But regardless of whether that's in there or not, I mean, Soul of Innistrad is always a solid card because you know creatures are going to die over the course of the game. Being able to get them back to your hand to replay them could be a big deal, especially if the game wears on for a long time. So this is a decent inclusion. Flame Blast Dragon. This is okay. Like, it does deal with creatures some of the time, but you do have to attack to trigger the ability. So that is a little bit awkward sometimes on a 5/5 flyer when it comes to a commander game where you could have some big creatures in the air. This is a card you could probably upgrade to something a little bit better, but it's not horrible out of the box. Acidic Slime, always good to have. I mean, it deals with problems that sometimes you don't have other answers for in the form of artifacts or enchantments or lands. Aside from that, though, in this particular deck, you might want to even blow up one of your own lands so it goes to the graveyard, and maybe you have a way to recur it, play it again with landfall, or maybe use it for retrace. So there are times where that could be relevant. Avenger of Zendikar. So I mentioned this was in here, of course, and it's a very powerful card. Now, when it comes to reprints, this is actually one of the more expensive ones. As a matter of fact, the most valuable reprint you're getting. And it's only about $4 or $5. So yeah, value-wise, there's definitely some issues with this particular deck especially. We'll talk more about that at the end. Baloth, Woodcrasher. Finally another landfall ability. There are some in here, trust me, we'll get to them. But there doesn't feel like there's enough necessarily for what this deck's trying to do. But this is an okay one. Borderland Explorer. Well, this makes sure you hit a land drop or fixes your color. It also helps everybody else at the table. Now, considering you're in a deck that cares about lands, this is going to help you probably more than it's going to help everybody else, so I could see playing it. Not to mention that discard effect could be relevant to you. It also could forge some goodwill, and there's nothing wrong with that. Badoka Gardener, which will eventually become Dokai, Weaver of Life. Very good card. I mean, that first ability is extremely good at powering out lands, but you will find that there feels like there's a disproportionate amount of cards that let you put lands into play fast compared to payoffs like landfall cards, right? So that feels a little weird to me. Well, this is one of the cards that does help landfall, and that second ability after it does flip is pretty good and does reward you for having a lot of lands. Center of Vinecrasher. Now this one is all about lands in your graveyard, so now we're going to a whole different part of the board state to decide whether this card is going to be helpful or not. And again, that feels a little strange to me. Sometimes this deck wants lands in the graveyard, sometimes they want them in your hand, sometimes they want them on the battlefield. It kind of can't make up its mind. So anyway, this is a fine card if you have enough targets in the graveyard. Farhaven Elf, another way to push out lands quicker and activate landfall maybe an extra time. Moldgraph Monstrosity. Big trample creatures are never a bad thing. When this one dies, you get to return 2 creature cards at random from your graveyard to the battlefield. I do like things going directly to the battlefield. Now, if you can control which creatures are in your graveyard, that would mean you're getting good stuff back all the time, but that does take a little finessing. In a vacuum, though, it's an okay card, definitely, and plays into that sub-theme of what's in the graveyard matters. Rampaging Baloths. Alright, back to landfall again, and another decent landfall card here. Sakura Tribe Elder, another card that's going to push out lands faster and maybe give you an extra landfall trigger. Scoot Mob. I like Scoot Mob. I mean, it doesn't have trample or anything, but the good news is you're only paying 1 for it. So in this deck, it should be pretty easy to quickly get to 5 lands. It will start getting bigger and bigger. And eventually an opponent's got to deal with it or it could become problematic. But again, it doesn't have evasion, so it can be blocked just by a token or something like that. And eventually someone will have an answer. The good news, like I said, though, it's cheap to cast. Yavimaya Elder. Good to note, too, with all the recursion that's in this deck, some of the creatures with enters and leaves battlefield effects do get that much better. They maybe should have built this as a recycle deck instead of a land matters deck. Rubble Hulk. I always like this card. Again, it's going to be pretty sizable in this deck where you're going to be playing a lot of lands and putting a lot of lands out there. The Blood Rush, though, is very interesting to use on maybe a trample creature and perhaps sometimes put someone away. Zendikar Incarnate, not one of my favorites here. I mean, yes, the power will get pretty high in this deck, no doubt, but it doesn't have trample or anything, and the toughness is going to stay at 4. Feels like you could be doing something better than that. Charnel Horde Worm. Okay, this is a way to get card, not creature, but card back from your graveyard to your hand. That could include lands, or it could be a creature, whatever you need, so I do like that. It does have to connect with an opponent, though. It does have trample, that's going to help a little bit, but it's not super big for the World of Commander as a 6/6. I do think over the course of a game, though, you might be able to trigger this once, maybe twice if you're lucky and find value. Okay, let's look at sorceries. Ruinous Path. Yes, it has Awaken 4, so it kind of plays into the land theme here a little bit, but really you're playing this because it's a really good destroy spell. Destroy target creature or planeswalker for just 3. It is a sorcery, it's not instant, but it's still really, really good. Stitched Together. Okay, here's where things get interesting, because now we have a sorcery, and if you have Threshold, which a lot of the times you will, now you're actually reanimating. So you're kind of like, wow, where did that come from? Now, there are some good creatures in this deck, but nothing that I would say is a really critical reanimation target. Again, it just feels a little disjointed in that regard. And even if you don't have Threshold, again, you are dumping some cards into the graveyard, so you'll be able to get a creature back to your hand. That might be good enough for 2 mana. But yeah, again, it just feels like this deck is just all over the board. Chain Reaction. Okay, this is a board sweep style spell that cares about how many creatures are in play, not lands. Now, again, what's strange about this is I don't have indestructible creatures. I don't have necessarily any really high toughness creatures that are out of the ordinary. So I gotta ask myself, why am I playing this over, I don't know, many other board sweeps? Cultivate, another way to keep the lands flowing, maybe get an extra landfall trigger, nothing wrong with that. Explore, this can be a little high variance because a lot of times you go to use it and you don't have the additional land, but you do get to draw a card. Many times you'll draw into a land, which is kind of nice. And this deck is trying to keep the lands flowing and let you juggle them a little bit, so I feel like it's at least pretty good in this deck. Explosive Vegetation, fantastic way to, again, maybe even get 3 land drops in 1 turn for landfall. Far Wanderings, the Threshold is great, potentially 4 landfall triggers if everything works out for you. That's kind of awesome, and even if you don't have Threshold, an additional 1 could be fine too. Hunting Wilds. Okay, so again, this is a card that's going to help you defend yourself by, in this case, turning your forest into creatures as well. But I gotta point out, there's only 7 forests in this entire deck, at least out of the box. This feels just really strange to me. Like, again, it's not a bad card by any means, but I feel like this could be a lot better in other builds. It's another way to put out extra lands, though, if nothing else. Gaze of Granite. Decent card here. It's going to let you destroy a lot of non-land permanents if you need to. Now, it's going to hit your stuff too, but it is a good panic button card to have. Worm Harvest. Here's another Retrace card finally. It's been a while, but we get another one. And this is a good one. Again, it kind of plays into the idea that you're doing a lot of stuff with your lands, but also populating your board state with these tokens to defend yourself as well. So it does play into what this deck's trying to do. Decimate. Yeah, another decent removal spell here. Destroy target artifact, target creature, target enchantment, and target land. So again, in a big game of Commander, you could either focus all that on one person or focus it all around the table. And it's just a decent card, just generally. And like I mentioned with Acidic Slime, there might be times you could want to use this on your own lands. Savage Twister. The deck that's making a lot of small tokens is now blowing them up. I'm not really sure why. But again, it feels a little strange. Like I just made 3/3 forest tokens and 1/1 worm tokens. Why would I have Savage Twister in my deck? And yeah, I get it. It's a good panic button. You might need it at some point. Someone else may be exploiting small creatures more than you are. But again, it just feels really strange to me. Lavalanche. Now, this is a great inclusion because you know you're going to be powering out lands. You're going to have a lot of extra mana available to you. And this could be very devastating. In a pinch, if someone's picking on you, you can mess with their board state. But you really want to try to hold on to this to take an opponent out, especially the last opponent at the end of the game. That's where this would really shine. So yeah, this is an awesome card. Glad that it's here. Instance. Moonlight Bargain. This one's kind of interesting. I mean, there's better draw spells in black that you could use, but this one is at instant speed. And yeah, you do have to pay life to get the cards, but many times you might want to throw the cards in the graveyard because that's kind of where this deck's going anyway. So it makes sense. I do feel like there's more efficient ways to do this, though. Consigned to Dust. I like Strive cards in Commander. Like, this is just fine. It's going to let you deal with maybe a number of problematic artifacts or enchantments. Grapple with the Past. You're populating the graveyard again, but you're also taking a creature or land card back to your hand. Especially that land might be relevant. Harrow. I like this because it's an instant, so you can trigger some of those landfall abilities on the fly, and that's kind of awesome. Some of the creatures we saw earlier can do this too, but this card doesn't telegraph the potential landfall triggers. Grizzly Salvage, good instant here. It lets you dig for a creature or maybe, again, more importantly in this deck, a land card, at least some of the time. And then the rest go to the graveyard, which again, we've seen does matter. Putrefy, yeah, very solid removal spell for artifact or creature at instant speed. Enchantments. Yay, finally another landfall card. It's Retreat to Hagra. And again, this could be really good with all the ways to power out lands. Colony Heart Expedition. This is a landfall trigger that allows for more landfall triggers later on. So as long as you have a reason to do that, this will be fine for you. Deathreap Ritual. Great card. I love this card just generally. The morbid ability here at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, you draw a card. put this out in a game of Commander, and it looks a little innocuous, but it's going to draw you cards as time goes on and give you a lot of advantage. Nice payoff for the cards in this deck that incite action, and don't forget, you have some creatures that can sack themselves too. Artifacts. Seer's Sundial. Okay, this is another landfall card, and this is a pretty good one. Could lead to some card draw for you. Soul Ring, believe it or not, this is the second highest valued reprint in this particular deck after Avenger of Zendikar. These will usually run you between $3.50, $4 typically. But hey, Soul Ring, it's a great card. Glad to see these reprinted as much as they are, because could you imagine the price if they weren't printed every year? Lands. Okay, you're going to see a lot of quote-unquote fetch lands. Now, don't get excited, not the fetch lands, but a lot of lands that will let you fetch for other lands. We'll start off with a Calm Refuge. Now, you're going to see a whole bunch of these comes into play tap duels. Yeah, these are cards you want to upgrade. Obviously, there's better options, but out of the box, I mean, they're fine. Baron Moor. This particular deck has a lot of the cycling cards too, which again, because you can throw the land in your graveyard, then maybe get it back later, does make sense. Blighted Woodland. Okay, here's one of those cards that is a quote-unquote fetch land. Not, again, one of the fetch lands. But still, you're going to see a lot of this. It's just going to help you get extra landfall triggers and power out some lands. Bojuka Bog, always a solid card. I mean, it's just kind of here to deal with some graveyard shenanigans across the table, so you'll be happy to have it if you need it. Command Tower, always awesome. In a 3-color deck, this will be great. Evolving Wilds, another way to play this and then fetch for another land for those landfall triggers. Forgotten Cave, here's another cycling card. Golgari Rot Farm. I like bounce lands. Even if I upgrade the mana base here, I'd probably keep that. Grim Backwoods. This does play into the fact that you do have a lot of ways to recur stuff back out of your graveyard, and also you're creating tokens here and there. So yeah, this card could be decent. Gruul Turf, another bounce land. Haunted Fengraf, another card that's trying to reward you for filling your graveyard. Jund Panorama, again, another card that's going to let you fetch for a second land that turn. Jungle Hollow, one of the comes into play tap duels. Another one with Kazandu Refuge. Colony Garden, this is nothing crazy, but I guess it works with Avenger of Zendikar. Mountain Valley, one of the old comes into play tapped fetch lands. What's awkward about these is because it comes into play tapped, you play this tapped, so you can't use it that turn. So you really are setting up the next turn and hopefully have another land drop to really take advantage of this. But it's still pretty good in this deck. Again, you would probably want to upgrade these with real fetches if they were available to you. Myriad Landscape, again, comes into play tapped, so consider that. But this time at least you get to pull 2 lands. So even if you don't have another land to drop, you're still getting a little bonus out of it for landfall. Rakdos Carnarium, another bounce land. Rocky Tar Pit, another comes into play tapped fetch. Savage Lands for some color fixing. Temple of the False God. I mean, this is a solid commander card. Like, it doesn't feel like it's amazing in this particular deck because you're going to have 5 lands no matter what pretty quickly in commander, but it's still good. Terramorphic Expanse, again, great way to get an extra landfall trigger. Tranquil Thicket, here's the green cycling land. Warped Landscape, again, another way to search up a land, and this one doesn't come into play tapped, which is nice. And you're going to get 6 swamps, 5 mountains, and finally, the aforementioned 7 forests. Alright, so what do I think about this deck? Well, you kind of heard my thoughts as we went through. I just don't know what it's trying to do. Like, I don't feel like there's enough landfall triggers to really make all the ways to power out land feel good enough to me. Because, yeah, they're all good triggers, but if anything happens to them, my nesting dragon dies or something like that, all of a sudden I just have a lot of ways to throw lands on the battlefield and maybe nothing to do with them. There are a lot of ways to bring stuff back to my hand, so yes, it's trying to juggle a little bit. So if they blow up my nesting dragon, I can get it back. There are still powerful plays in this deck, like for example, Avenger of Zendikar, and again, a lot of the gold cards are really solid. But then you have this whole sub-theme of trying to force attacks and the token creation, which is a good sub-theme, but will it be reliable if it's only a small percentage of the cards in my deck? Is it really going to come up and be relevant, in other words? That's another issue. Now, I could make the spider my commander, and then it would be more relevant. But again, will the support be there if I do that, as opposed to using Lord Windgrace and trying to juggle lands more? Then at the end, you throw in some graveyard shenanigans, even a little bit of reanimation, which again doesn't feel like it's fully realized. I did mention earlier that this feels like a recycle deck, but I think the only problem is none of the elements feel strong enough to be reliable. And yeah, I do have these landfall cards. There's not enough of them to feel really good, but I can recur them, but there's not enough recursion to make it consistent. And ultimately, that's the big issue I have with the deck. Everything feels a little bit too thin. So this deck feels like it would be a little bit weak. Even out of the box playing against the other ones, I feel like this could have a tough time. Now, the second thing I got to talk about here is value. Value is severely lacking this year in these products, and the price went up from $34.99 to $39.99. So you're paying $5 more and you're getting less value when it comes to reprints and such. And that is a problem. We talked about it at length in part 1 of the review when we looked at the Is It deck, but it's even worse in this deck. And I mentioned as we went through the video, some of the key reprints here are simply Avenger of Zendikar, which is a $4 or $5 card, and Sol Ring, which is a $3 or $4 card. That is extremely low. Now, if you add up the value of all the bulk cards in here, you're going to come up to probably around $70 to $80, which is pretty low. But again, you got to remember, those are bulk cards. Unless you own a game store or something, you're never going to be able to get that kind of value out of the cards. Not that this should be a product you want to flip anyway. I mean, that's never the intention, nor would it be a good idea. But it's not feeling like I'm getting my money's worth out of what I'm spending here. And that's a problem. Even if the deck was amazing, that's going to tug at you a little bit. Like, I just spent $40 on this product. Maybe I could have took that $40, added a little more to it, and built a really solid deck that I'm really excited about. Because I'm still going to have to upgrade this thing, and that's going to cost more money if I actually want to play with it. Now, when it comes to upgrades, I do think there's a lot of cool directions you can go. We are going to be doing upgrade videos in the future. And I do like the fact that there are different themes here that I could build on if I like one of the particular ones more than others. And that's kind of cool, but again, it's going to cost my own money, or hopefully maybe I have my own cards already in the collection that will help. But it will probably end up costing more money to do that, and that's also an issue for a lot of players. So ultimately, I can't give this one a high grade. I think out of the 4, this is my least favorite, unfortunately, because there are elements I really like. I like the Planeswalker, I like the other commanders, but it just feels like this deck is all over the board. Alright, with that being said, that's the second part. We got 2 more decks to look at. We'll be looking at them later in the week. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.